games. And the BYU Cincinnati game is like, we'll talk about it on Inside the 12, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about it more here this week. But it is jumping off the page at me as like, first of all, okay, BYU fans, brace yourselves. I know you don't care. I know this doesn't mean anything to you because you're so hardcore, and I love and respect that. But the line on this game grabs me, right? 2.5 points BYU is favored by. Now, this Cincinnati team has been struggling of late. And this game they're playing is at home again this week, right? I'm not breaking any news. But, like, to go on the road, it's a 7 p.m. game, so it's going to be a night game on Fox, right? Big noon kickoff, or not big noon kickoff, but the Fox pregame show will be there in Cincinnati at Nippert Stadium, which will only add to the atmosphere and the energy of the crowd. It's going to be a long day. There's going to be a lot of boozing going on. That will be a scary environment for just about anybody going into Cincinnati to play the Bearcats on that Saturday night. And I have no reason to believe that Bear Bachmeier or BYU would falter, right? They control their path to the Big 12 title game if they can just continue to win out. And it's very clear that the committee loves teams who win games, particularly on the road in November. So this is a game where if you can win this game and if you can do it convincingly, you're playing against an opponent who college football looks upon as, Cincinnati was top 25 for a while this year. They're a reputable program. If BYU could go in there and beat them by like 2 touchdowns, it really, really helps their cause if you're to get a rematch with Texas Tech in the Big 12 title game and you were to lose that game, you still may have a shot at getting in. But if you beat Texas Tech, right, then you're definitely like, okay, you're an automatic bid. But if you lose that Big 12 championship game to Texas Tech and you win a game like this, like, it's a scary game for BYU, but I also look at it as a real opportunity. And a loss really, it's not like, I was surprised this morning when I really did a bunch of digging into the numbers. Like, Utah is going to have to win out and just hope for help from the committee and some chaos, right, in the SEC. That's what they'll have to do in order for them to make the college football playoff. So it's not like if BYU loses this game that all of a sudden you open the door for Utah. Now, it is quite possible. It's very slim. And we've got Glenn Parker coming up, former Arizona Wildcat, played in the NFL for 14 years, I think, started 174 games, right, for the Bills and the Chiefs and the Giants. This is a big-time NFL player with hardcore roots to Tucson and Arizona. So I want to ask him about Arizona, especially as they ramp up to play Baylor. But Arizona now is battling for an opportunity. But they're pretty much out of it. Arizona State is the school that you have to look at and say, okay, they're still actually in the mix, believe it or not. As far as percentage chances to make the Big 12 title game, I'll read them off for you, okay? You've got Texas Tech, 97%, BYU, 75%, Arizona State, 17%, and Utah, 6%, Cincinnati, 1.5%, right? So those are opportunities just to get in there. Houston, 3.6%, and somehow Kansas State, 0.57%. So some crazy stuff has to happen there. But this is also, Cincinnati is a team that plays physical November type football. And BYU plays somewhat of the same. I think the key for BYU in a game like this, and this is not like I'm uncovering some huge football information here, but BYU just got to take care of the football. When you look at their loss this year, their one loss, it was to Texas Tech, and they lost the turnover battle 3-0, right? Texas Tech had 3 takeaways. BYU had 0. And one of those was a muff punt by Parker Kingston, like something that will never happen again. So you've just got to hope that you can hold on to the football, have some explosive plays, but also control the tempo and keep Cincinnati in that potent offense because, they can run the ball at you, and then they have Brendan Sorsby, right, who can put it right over the top and dink and dunk you as well. So it's going to have to be like Cincinnati has a very experienced front seven, right? Led by Dante Corleone, the Godfather. That guy is in on a lot of plays around the line of scrimmage. He's somewhere, I think when you look at this BYU defense and you start to think about, okay, how are we going to, at the Cincinnati defense, and you start to think if you're Aaron Roderick and the offensive coordinator, like Dante Corleone is one of those guys, he's a Tuesday problem. Like you're driving to work on Tuesday, if you're Aaron Roderick and you're thinking how are we going to stop Dante Corleone? Like he's that big of a powerhouse up front defensively for Cincinnati. And he's just part of a really good front seven. So there's going to have to be an opportunity for BYU to take control of the game early. I do feel like this is probably the most underrated game on the calendar this college football weekend. But the good news is you won't have to look hard to find it. 7 p.m. on Big Fox. And it's something that I think a lot of people, it's going to end up. Here's the thing. This is where a game like this is awesome. And this is where the Big 12 has really come through for a lot of its fans and just its conference as a whole. You go back, man, a couple years ago. Probably 4. When these big-time television contracts were on the table and when the Pac-12 still had a conference, and I'll say this before Glenn Parker comes on because I don't want to make him upset, but when the Pac-12 still had a real heartbeat for their conference, they kind of turned their nose up at some of these TV deals. And I'm not, I don't have all the details right here in front of me and I don't have them straight off the dome, but I know enough about them to know that the Pac-12 had an opportunity to solidify a television deal that would have put them into households all over the world, right? Specifically here in America on primetime games like tonight, right? And they thumbed their nose at that, at a couple television deals and possibilities. And, Brett Yormark was there after taking over for Bob Bowlesby in the Big 12, and he found a way to put the Big 12 in everybody's living room in prime time, Saturday, right? It's going to be, especially in certain regions of the country, the Midwest and the Northeast, it's going to be cold. People are going to be inside. There's a holiday vibe. They're going to turn on the television and they're going to see right on Fox, right? BYU and Cincinnati. My dad, God rest his soul, would have found that, boom, boom. Oh, this game's on. I'm going to watch it. There is really still a major power of finding yourself and getting your product on those Hallmark channels that are, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, and then, main ESPN and ESPN2. So props to the Big 12. And I think that is what makes this game something that will be celebrated on Saturday. Now, if you're a BYU fan, you really need to hope that the Bear Bachmeier train just keeps going. And we've seen no sign of anything changing. The key is, and I'll reference our boy Dave Aranda, because I listened to his whole press conference yesterday. And as downtrodden as this team is right now, and as much as they need to change, I still do love listening to head coaches talk. I listened to 2 press conferences, or I listened to a couple yesterday, 3. But I listened to Dave Aranda, and I listened to Mortensen, the coach for UAB, interim coach. He took over for Trent Dilfer because I have UAB this weekend, UAB and USF. But Dave said something that I loved. He just talked about how, your future is not based on your past at all, right? You have to make decisions this week that will affect change and get you ready for this weekend, this Saturday. Nothing you did last week, good or bad, carries over, right? It's not like the old school cell phone plan, rollover minutes. It doesn't. You have to prepare now to beat, if you're Baylor, Arizona, and if you're BYU, to beat Cincinnati. So I bring that up, Bear Bachmeier just has to keep doing his thing. And that's why coaches talk about a process, right? And stick to the process. The process is what makes you great. And that brings me to what Mortensen said yesterday. He was talking about certain players that will play or not play for UAB. And he was talking about a guy that he really likes. And he talked about, when you evaluate this guy, because Mortensen used to coach at Alabama. He's Chris Mortensen's son, by the way. He used to coach at Alabama for Nick Saban, and he said, my old boss used to say, there were guys who were, you're either an and guy or you're a but guy, right? And that is basically like, Bear Bachmeier. He's a dual threat quarterback. He can run you over, but he can throw over the top of the defense. And he's a great character guy, and he's somebody you can count on to be first in the building and last out. As opposed to John Smith is a burner. He gets behind the defense. He makes amazing one-handed catches. And when he goes over the middle, he knows how to sit down underneath coverage, but he's a huge pain in the ass. His character sucks. He never goes to class, right? And I just love hearing stuff like that. Like, it makes me a better person. Like, I could sit and listen to coaches all day long, even if their teams suck, right? Like Baylor, because I still think you can find the gems in there, right? There's always like interesting nuggets of information. All right, we got big nuggets of information coming up on the other side of the break. Glenn Parker's going to join us, former Arizona Wildcat, longtime NFL offensive lineman. The guy played pretty much every position but center, and he started at all those other positions. So I'm pumped to talk to him about it. He also lost 5 Super Bowls. We'll definitely talk about that because you got to talk about that. I'm curious to see like where his head's at with that. But to lose 5 Super Bowls, you got to be on some of the best teams ever. So be cool to talk to him. The Pete Souza Show is presented by Slovaceks. We are back after this break.